Welcome once again to VintageDrumsTalk.com. Jim Messina here. I'm glad you've come to the live interviews page because I've got my old friend Mark Cooper once again here to talk to you about a set of Radio Kings that is his favorite dream set. How you doing, Mark? Tell us all about it.
I'm doing great, Jim. How are you?
Good. Waiting for you to tell us about your dream kit, Slingerland. What is it?
Slingerland Radio King set.
Fantastic.
Well, let me tell you about my dream kit.
I'd love to hear about it.
Like I've said before, I've been collecting vintage drums for about 30 years, going back to the very early 80s.
Uh-huh.
And one of the first magazine articles I had read on vintage drums was in Modern Drummer, and it was an article on that famous collector Charlie Donnelly.
Yes, early on. In fact, I consider him to be kind of the father of the whole vintage drum community here.
Exactly. Yes, he was a great guy.
The name keeps coming up.
He was my go-to guy whenever I was trying to learn, about vintage drums, and he always would, be happy to talk about them. And in this article, there was a drum that just jumped off the page at me, and it was a Slingerland sea green pearl snare drum, and I had never seen that finish before, and it was just mesmerizing. It was just this beautiful finish, and I said, "What is this?" And I read about it, and it was a pretty rare finish, and it originated back in the late 1920s when Slingerland first came into being. And I said, someday I have to have a snare drum in this finish, in this sea green pearl finish. And wouldn't it be incredible to find a drum set, complete set in that color?
And it looks to me like it did, because I'm putting this picture up right now. Take a look at this, collectors. This is a beautiful set. What year would this set actually be, Mark?
Well, that would be a 1936 drum set.
1936.
From all indications, which is the first year for Radio King drums when they came into being. And the rarity of the sea green pearl is one thing, but to find it in an actual Radio King drum set from that era is pretty remarkable, mainly because the sea green pearl finish was being phased out and was pretty much gone by 1938.
Uh-huh.
And so to find it on a 1936 drum set is just pretty incredible and extremely rare.
Now, I'm noticing on this particular set, on one of the toms here, it looks like we have double-sided lugs, double-sided streamlined lugs.
Yes, it's on actually on both of the tom-toms, the 16x16 and the 9x13.
Uh-huh.
And the reason that is, when they first introduced the streamlined lugs on tom-toms in 1936, and that came about because of Gene Krupa. Gene came up with the idea, really, of having tunable tom-toms where you had a row of lugs for the top as well as the bottom, so you could tune both heads.
Now, I know that he's been credited for that, but I think there's some dispute as to, who actually did come up with separate tuning. Was it Leedy?
Well, if you look at the old Leedy catalogs of that time, they had mainly the tacked-on bottom head.
Right.
And they didn't really get into the double-headed.
So this was sort of a custom thing just for Gene Krupa. He's the one who kind of got Slingerland to do this, and that's why this set exists in this sea green.
Yeah, and I've even seen in photographs where his very first tom-toms had tube lugs on top and bottom. So back to the reason why these tom-toms have what looks to be snare drum lugs, with an opening on both sides.
Yeah.
They didn't have any tom-tom lugs available yet. They hadn't geared up to make them yet. All they had was snare drum lugs.
I see.
Which were called streamlined. And so, just being the way Slingerland was, they just went ahead and used what they had, and they would never waste anything. So until they could actually gear up to make single-ended tom-tom lugs, they just started putting these two rows of snare drum lugs on top and bottom of the tom-toms.
Now, from what I see here, this finish on your dream set right here is just beautiful. I'm not seeing any cracks. What are the chances of usually when you find a set at this age, something's always wrong. There's a cigarette burn, there's cracking, or something's wrong with the inlays. But what I'm seeing here is
Well, it's funny you
flawless.
mention that because it's probably not visible in the photograph, but the floor tom, the 16 by 16, does
Yeah.
have a little small cigarette burn near a lug.
Ah,
And the way this set came about is kind of odd. I acquired the 16 by 16 drum from famous collector and drummer Bunny Carlos.
yes.
Cheap Trick.
Oh, our good old friend Bunny, Uber
Yes,
collector.
he knew I was looking for some sea green. I guess I made it known continually.
Well,
I was
he's
looking for-
known for his sea green stuff. I don't know if he still has it all, but I think I'm not sure if Dave Brown bought a set from him. But yeah, Bunny was also into the sea green, and he got me kind of interested in it also.
Right. But he contacted me and said he had a floor tom, and I went, "What?"
Now I'm noticing the floor tom, the handles on here. Tell us about those. The T
Oh,
handles.
The timpani handles.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an option on all tom-toms actually back in the from 36 till the later 30s. If you wanted those, some guys liked them on the bottom so they could reach down easy and without a drum key. And so that was just an option. And this drum, when I got it from Bun, it didn't have any hoops or tension rods or anything. So that was just, I happen to have a couple boxes of those timpani handles waiting for just such a project.
Yeah. Now, folks, don't get the idea that Mark has tons and tons of parts for you. I'll tell you right now, Mark uses all his parts because you get a lot of calls, right? Don't you looking for parts and you have to tell people, look, I need them myself
Yeah,
for your restorations.
Sometimes it's painful to have to turn away the throngs of people that are
Well,
beating down the doors for parts. But I usually have places I can refer them to.
now, you still have this set, right? This is your favorite set?
Oh, yeah.
Or, okay.
They'll probably bury me in this one. But an interesting thing about that floor tom, you mentioned how the small tom had the double-ended lugs. Well, the floor tom is even older, or at least the lugs are. They're from the broadcaster era. They're threaded, or maybe not broadcaster, but the very, very, very first Radio King lugs.
They're the tapped lugs, is what you're saying.
Yes.
There's no inserts.
Exactly. Yes. Now on the 9x13, it just happened that it went in three stages. The first lugs had the tapped inserts, and then the shortly thereafter they came out with the spring-loaded inserts like you see on the 9x13. But the floor tom has the very, very first ones with the threaded openings.
Are these the original calf heads on here that I'm looking at?
No, they're not.
Okay.
They just came out of my collection of calfskin heads that I keep around for projects like this. But so putting Bunny's floor tom back together took a little bit of work, but it was. I just couldn't believe that he had that, and that he was.
I'm surprised. I am surprised. Now you're saying you found originally the bass drum. What's the size on the bass drum?
That is a 14 by 24.
Okay, 24.
I found both of those. I found both the bass drum and the 9x13 together. They were, from what I can tell, they were born together. They came from the factory together.
Okay, and then you bought the floor tom from Bunny. I am surprised at the match you've got here.
I'm sorry,
all the pearl matches. That's really it. That's really something.
The notches?
No, I'm saying the color matches. It's
I'm sorry.
The floor tom matches the kick drum and the 9x13. Beautifully.
It's a perfect color match. I couldn't believe it either when I working my way backwards, starting to build a kit from the floor tom up.
Uh-huh.
It was a little odd way to do it, but that there is 100% perfect color match between all three of those drums.
Now, what did you have to do to this set? You got the 9x13 and you got the 24-inch kick. What needed to be done to get them into this condition? Were they bad in the first place, or were they just
not too bad? The 9x13 mainly, I just had to clean it up with some Windex and a soft cloth. That was about it for that.
That's amazing, because a lot of the stuff I get from this era, just I have to spend weeks with it and go to some pretty drastic measures sometimes. But what a luck out!
But yeah, fortunately, and everything had chrome hardware, which is much easier to clean up.
I'm surprised this is not nickel.
Well, it seems to me, it's been my experience that the very early Radio King drums, more often than not, had chrome hardware, and I'm not really sure why, but I think as more and more sets were being ordered, and people found out that they could save a little bit of money by going with nickel.
Yeah,
that became the popular choice. But I've seen a lot of the very early Radio King drums seem to have all chrome hardware, and in this case, that's a definite plus for me.
Yeah, because I know in some of the catalogs, they mention the crossover between nickel and chromium. They make a big deal out of that.
Yeah. And the floor tom, I told you that was a bit of a restoration job there, but it turned out really nice. Now the bass drum was the most unusual piece of the three.
Uh-huh.
And when I received that drum, I looked at it and I thought, this is odd. 14x24 was kind of unheard of
for that era. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was mainly 14x28, and gradually went to the 14x26. Now they existed, but you just didn't see them very often.
This would be considered this be considered to be small, wouldn't it? A
yes,
24 back then.
Yeah, 28 was a 14x28 was the standard size all through the 20s into the 30s and even into the early 40s. So I'm looking at the bass drum and I thought something weird about this, and then I noticed that two of the rows of lugs were just slightly further apart from each other than any of the other ones.
Really?
And I'm looking at it, and I thought, why is that? Then a light went off in my head, and it's like, okay, this drum was cut down.
Really?
From an original size of 14x28.
I've heard of that. In fact, I encountered that one time. I never really read about that, but yeah, tell them about that, how they actually would cut down a 28-inch kick. And I don't know how they do this and get this to actually butt up against how to get it to work out correctly. But how did you find that out? You could see a seam somewhere or what?
Well, down at the first indication was at the overlap seam of the pearl finish, there were 4 mystery holes that were spaced just like they would be for the lug screws. But the mystery was the holes didn't go through the shell; they just went through the pearl.
And
I thought, well, why is that? Why would they do? Who would drill shallow holes just through the pearl? And I took the drum apart, and then it's like, aha, this has been cut down. Whoever did it, and it was probably a furniture maker that did it because it was so well done.
Really, yeah. But to me, it's why would someone do that? You don't know when it was done.
The reason for that is as the bebop era approached in the late 40s, and maybe even a bit earlier, I suppose, the giant bass drums started to go out of favor, and drummers wanted smaller bass drums.
So rather, maybe they couldn't afford one at the time, so they just take what they had and cut it down?
Very likely. I mean, back then people didn't throw things away as easily. And just they made do with what they had, or they altered what they had, and that was a common practice. I don't know. I've had several bass drums that I knew.
Really?
In fact, were cut. Yeah, like 1930s Ludwig bass drums that were 14x22.
And they do the same with the hoops?
Yeah.
They would have to.
I mean, this is a mystery to me how they even did this, because it's so well done. And where the seam is, they put this polished, stained, smooth, angled piece of wood over, and screwed and glued over top of the seam so you don't see it. And it's just and they stained the whole thing inside and finished it. and there's a couple bolts that they put through the reinforcing rings to just solidify everything and keep it all together. And then the hoops were cut down too because it's the original inlay, and I could see slight indication of where they had made the cuts and how they did it. And
that just makes this all that more interesting.
It makes it even more desirable to me because I love a 14 by 24 size, and you just don't see them from that era.
Well, to me, the reason I think that it makes it more interesting, actually from an historical sense, because that was probably done a long, long time ago. Not someone doing it in the 60s. Maybe their grandfather gave them the set or something. No,
right.
This sounds more like it went along with the changing trend of drumming, which sort of gives the drums more of a vibe. Even I'll call it provenance, because it was a natural thing that everyone was doing, not some restructuring a long time later. This
exactly, yeah.
It makes them quirky.
Restoration.
Yeah, it's sort of an allowable restoration. It's not something that would devalue the set at all, I don't think.
Almost like the way they altered back in the 50s. They made the hot rods.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you see one today, an old restoration, and it has a certain vibe to it.
Yeah.
And most likely I would guess it was done in the late 40s, maybe early 50s, when the smaller bass drum.
Yeah. So you can't say, "Oh no, that's a shame. The set's been ruined." No way. It's actually been enhanced. I think as far as its desirability, like you say, being sea green, the Radio King aspect, and the time frame, along with this modification, really makes it a highly collectible piece as a set.
Normally I would look at an alteration like that and say, "Gee, I wish they hadn't done this." But this is one of those rare cases, at least to me, where it's like, yeah, that's really cool that they did this.
Well, really, I've heard of it. I think I even ran across something in my own collection. We were going over something, but I couldn't really explain it. Someone else had to show me that, this has been cut down, and I don't know why. But now I know that that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, and as far as how they did it, I still don't quite understand. It's kind of like, how did they make the pyramids? Someone knows how to do it, and if you're a furniture maker, I'm sure it's a no-brainer. But to me, it's just like, wow, how do you do that and not have it come out looking like an egg?
Mark, why don't we put that to our viewers out there?
Yeah.
You guys watch us talking about this, and we don't claim to know absolutely everything, but we have some pretty interesting examples and mystery. So if some of you are out there watching and maybe you know just about how they did this, why don't you drop me a line at vintagedrumstalk.com. There's my email. You can get a hold of me that way. And if you know, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And just like I love hearing from Mark Whitey Cooper of Cooper's Vintage Drums, we've had a great conversation about his Slingerland Sea Green 1936 Dream Kit. Everybody's got a dream, and I have a dream just like Martin Luther King had, huh? Except mine is in the vintage drum world. VintageDrumsTalk.com. Check it out once again for our next session with Mark Cooper. Also, I want you to check out his articles in Modern Drummer magazine. He had an article in the July issue just about Radio King, so you might want to try to seek that out. If not, we'll provide that right here on VintageDrumsTalk.com so you can see it. He's also had other articles, and he had one in the December issue, all about the knob tension drums, and that's another segment we did. Go back and check on that. Mark, once again, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, and I'm so glad that you took the time out to sit here and talk with me today.
Well, thank you, Martin.
Take care, my friend. We'll see you in the next segment. Mark Whitey Cooper.